Today, we're going to take a deep dive into something really epic. We're talking about Lachlan Morton's Ult Tour, which he did back in 2021. Now, you probably know about the Tour de France, right? But imagine if someone decided to do the entire thing, but solo, totally unsupported, and just for fun, decided to tack on an extra 1,300 miles. That's what Morton did, and, well, let's just say it's a pretty wild story.
It is. It's really fascinating because, I mean, on the surface, it just sounds impossible.
Yeah.
Like, the Tour de France, the official one, is such a spectacle. Got teams, you've got all this technology, and a ton of support.
Pampering, yeah.
Oh, yeah, tons of pampering. But Morton, he just stripped all of that away.
Yeah.
He turned it into something completely different, this raw adventure.
Okay, so let's break this down a little bit. So the actual Tour de France, we're talking roughly 2,100 miles.
Yeah.
But Morton's Ult Tour was a massive 3,424 miles.
Huge.
So just to get this straight, what does unsupported even mean in this situation?
It means exactly what it sounds like. So no team car following him around with spare parts and food and drinks, no mechanics to fix up his bike,
Yeah.
and no nice hotel rooms to sleep in at the end of the day. He carried everything he needed, camped, figured out his own route. If something broke, he was on his own.
So basically like MacGyver on a bike.
Pretty much, yeah.
I mean, that's incredible even for a pro cyclist. What kind of mileage are we even talking about, like per day?
He averaged about 200 miles each day. And some days were even longer than that, like over 230 miles. It's crazy.
My legs are hurting thinking about it. One thing that stood out, he rode in sandals for part of it.
Yeah, that's a great story. So early on, he started having really bad knee pain. So he decided to switch out his pedals. But here's the thing. He didn't go to a bike shop. He went to a regular supermarket.
What?
And he found these pedals on a really basic bike.
Supermarket bike pedals for this epic journey.
Yeah, totally. But there's a problem.
Okay.
These new pedals were wider than his old ones.
Right.
And they started giving him really bad blisters when he wore his cycling shoes.
Ouch.
So what did he do? He went out and bought a pair of sandals.
Wow.
Modified them a bit, you know. He took regular sandals and cut off one of the straps so they'd be more comfortable, more flexible.
Right.
And then, get this, someone who was following his ride online sent him some carbon insoles. For a huge chunk of the Ult Tour, he was riding in sandals.
Wow, a fan just hooked him up with some gear.
I know, right? Amazing.
That's so cool. It seems like this whole thing really caught people's attention.
It did, yeah. And those insoles made a huge difference. He was able to ride in those sandals for the rest of the trip.
Wow. Imagine doing that, riding in sandals for that kind of challenge. For those who don't know, what is World Bicycle Relief?
That's what really caught people's attention, I think. It wasn't just him pushing himself to the limit.
Right.
This Ult Tour was also a big fundraiser for World Bicycle Relief. They provide bicycles to people in developing countries. And these bikes, they're not just for fun or getting around. They can really change people's lives.
Yeah.
They give people access to education, healthcare, even jobs.
Wow.
It's really powerful.
So while he's doing this crazy challenge, he's also helping others.
It is, and he raised a ton of money too, over 356,000 pounds.
Wow.
That's enough to make a real difference for so many people. So yeah, even with all the blisters and the lack of sleep and just being exhausted, there was a bigger purpose behind it all.
Okay, but what about the route? How did he know where to go? Did he have maps, a fancy GPS, or just winging it?
Winging it for a 3,400 mile ride? Probably not a good idea. He mostly used a GPS device, but even then it wasn't always easy.
Right.
Remember, he wasn't just following the Tour de France route exactly.
Yeah, he was doing all the transfer stages too.
Exactly, the parts where the pro riders just hop on a bus or plane to get to the next starting point.
Right. So less well-known roads, probably tougher, and a higher chance of getting lost.
Yeah, for sure. And some of those transfer stages go through the middle of nowhere. So even with the GPS, there were times he had a weak signal, unexpected detours, and yeah, he definitely took some wrong turns.
That adds a whole other layer of difficulty.
It does.
Okay, so what about food? He couldn't carry enough for the whole trip. Was he stopping at fancy restaurants? Foraging for berries in the French countryside? What was he eating?
Oh, it was definitely not fancy restaurants.
Ah.
He mostly relied on grocery stores, little cafes, and whatever he could find. But there were times, especially in those more remote areas, when finding food was really tough.
So I'm guessing he was riding hungry sometimes, dehydrated.
Oh yeah, definitely. He even mentioned in one interview that for a while, all he had was cider, melon, and prosciutto.
Wow. Not exactly what you'd expect an athlete to be eating.
I know, right? So different from the pro riders with their fancy energy drinks and gels.
It just shows the difference between those two worlds, the pro peloton and what Morton did.
Totally. And I think that's part of why people are so drawn to his story.
Yeah.
So raw, so real. You see the struggle, the human element.
It's like a throwback,
Yeah.
like the early days of cycling when you had to rely on yourself. And it makes you wonder, how is what he's doing, this whole ultra-endurance personal exploration thing, how is that changing cycling?
That's a great point. A lot of people are asking that. Is this more relatable, self-supported style of cycling going to bring in a new generation of fans?
People who aren't necessarily into the traditional pro racing scene.
Yeah. Because there's definitely a growing interest in adventure cycling, bike packing, these rides where you rely on yourself. And Morton, with his whole approach and his message, he could be leading that movement.
But before we finish, there's one more thing we should talk about, the mental side of things.
It looks like he had this strategy.
So-
He'd break down this huge challenge into smaller pieces.
Yeah.
So instead of thinking about the total distance,
Right.
he'd focus on just reaching the next town, the next place to camp, the next meal. Each small win, each milestone, it helped him feel like he was making progress.
That's a good reminder for everyone, even if you're not cycling thousands of miles.